She is an economic geologist. She's a I may mess this up, paleontologist. She's a
Paleontologist.
microbiologist. She got her start probably in the Peace Corps with 2 years serving the Geo Survey of Tanzania. Anybody jealous yet? Tanzania? I haven't been there. She got various accolades from Ohio State, the University of Arizona, and Penn State. She did 34 years with the United States Geological Survey. 34 years.
Government pension.
Adjunct faculty member for San Diego State. She's quite the individual, an amazing geologist, amazing person, and I'm thankful to say personal friend of mine. Madam Nori Robbins, please tell us about the pigmentation by chembiotic oxidation of the tridal magnetite in red-brown Pleistocene terrace sandstones. I love you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask to not use chat when I'm talking because it distracts me. Is that okay with everybody?
Of course, a quick reminder, please save all questions till the end and then type them in the chat, just at the end of the talk though.
Okay, shall I start?
Yes,
Can you
please.
hear me? Am I heard?
Yes,
Loud
you're
and
good to
clear.
go.
Loud and clear.
Okay, good. All right, thanks. I have a loud booming voice also. Okay, so I'm the daughter of a physicist, of a system scientist. And my dad always taught when you're dealing with a complex system, you've got to pay attention to time, space, energy, matter, birth, life, and death of the system, and then the Earth's major subsystems, atmosphere, hydrosphere, chemisphere, biosphere, anthroposphere, lithosphere, and asthenosphere. And then, of course, he always put the dig in, and don't forget who taught you what. Well, I want you to know I'm going to be actually touching on these, except for death. The terrace forming system is still alive and well. So that's the only part I can't say anything about yet. So these are our terrace red beds, and they're absolutely gorgeous. Think the Torrey Pines, so Highway 52, and Via Cantabria and Encinitas. So what is a terrace? You know, if you're lucky to sail between San Diego along the coast of Southern California, you can terraces. But if you go out to the field with geologists, all of a sudden you realize there's actually 3 definitions of terraces. The one that geologists are talking about are marine terraces, and that this is La Jolla Cove, and you can see the sea lions here, and you can see that there's the marine terrace right there. It's cut by the ocean. But then on top of the marine terrace is a terrestrial terrace. And the terrestrial terrace, that's where people build houses. So that's whenever anyone points out a terrace to me, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm never thinking about marine terraces. And of course, as Roy Schliemann always tells us, remember, there's also river terraces. Okay, so here's our marine terraces. So here's Cabrillo, here's the Cretaceous rocks cut by the Pleistocene Ocean, and the Pleistocene Ocean then deposited the terrestrial terrace stuff on top. Here is Linda Vista. This is the type section. This is the Eocene that was cut by the Pleistocene Ocean, Pleistocene red beds on top. Here is the Torrey Pines, the Eocene that was cut by the Pleistocene Ocean, Pleistocene sediments. La Jolla Cove with people, not sea lions. Here's the Cretaceous that was cut by the Pleistocene, and there's the Pleistocene. And finally, San Onofre, there's the Miocene that was cut by the Pleistocene Ocean, and there's the Pleistocene. So there's this really beautiful diagram that Tom Rockwell put out. I'm sorry Tom's not here tonight. It's a digital elevation model, and it shows the marine terraces, And some of them, like the really young ones, they're all the way along the entire coast, all the way up into Orange County. And then the older ones, you just get like pieces of them. And with the older ones, it's really hard sometimes to even figure out which is attached to what. Okay, so this is one of those diagrams that I was able to put together from Kern and Rockwell, where you put the terraces on elevation on one side and time on the other. Elevation is known. They know what elevation these are. But actually, the only dates that were known was 80,000 and 100,000. So Tom worked probably with students to work out an uplift rate. And then what he did was then he multiplied uplift rate times elevation, and it gave this nice linear line of terraces. But I'm always worried about linear processes. So I was really happy finally to learn that they finally came up with a new date, a date on cosmogenic radionuclei. This is a 2020 paper, and the new date puts the Claremont Terrace, excuse me, at 1.5 million instead of at 700,000. So if you now use the uplift rate using that new date, it shoves these probably into the Pliocene. Okay, so this is another one of those amazing diagrams that Rockwell was part of, and that is showing that the marine terraces are combinations of land. So there's the uplift, here's the sea level. It took me forever to figure out what this diagram is really trying to show me, but here is the modern sea level, and there's high sea level right now. So this was cut by that sea level when that one was down at sea level. So it took me forever to figure out what this diagram meant. But then I was also interested, who's the brilliant person who actually figured this out? And I think it was Wyeth Cook, 1930. Then I was interested, well, tell me about these sea levels. So, you know, if the warms are that way and cold are the ones down here. And when our terraces were only in the Pleistocene, up to here, to here, there's 20 peaks, and so, okay, each terrace had a peak. However, now that there's this new date of 1.5 million, now we have to think about 40 sea level rises, and I have no clue how you fit that in. All right, what is causing uplift? So this is going to be structure, tectonics, and heat flow. Would you get me some water? Thanks. All right, the current hypothesis is that uplift is thermally driven by the Gulf of California rifting. And this is another one of those amazing Rockwell diagrams showing that here we have the Gulf of California that has high heat flow, and that heat flow from the mantle is pushing up the land, and therefore our terraces are on the western rift shoulder of the Gulf of California rifting, asthenosphere. Okay, to me, okay, so this is 150 kilometers away from where we are, and I was wondering if we had any closer processes. So my hypothesis is that we're dealing with local sources of high heat flow and rifting. Thanks. Okay, so we're really lucky to live in a place where we have West End and the USGS data set, because because the USGS said so, West puts all the data up online. And so for part of my dissertation, I worked on rift valleys of the Earth. And so I'm always interested in high heat flow. So I don't know, do you know what the average geothermal gradient of the Earth is? It's 1 degrees F 100 feet. Look at some of these numbers that are in these wells that Wes has drilled. 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit 100 feet, 1.8, 2.2, 1.6, 1.7, one under there is 1.8. Even that one is 1.7. That's really high heat flow. So then I said, well, what other kinds of processes do we have going on along the coast? And there was that fabulous data that Monty Marshall put out showing that right at this same place where we have high heat flow, he was able to show that there was a rift valley and that it's offset a little bit, so it's called a rhombochasm. And then if you look in cross section of this rift valley, you can see that this is the eastern shoulder of the rift valley, and that sort of matches where the terraces are too. So I'm a microscopist, I'm not a structural geologist, but that pieced together. All right, deposition on the marine terraces. All right, so this is another one of those Rockwell gorgeous ones that is showing deposition on the marine terraces. So here's where the ocean cut. And then here, as the ocean came up, it deposited, as the ocean came up, it's depositing a beach. And as it goes on down, it will deposit beach also. Okay, so let's see what these beaches look like. Let's see what these terraces look like on the geologic map. This is Kennedy and Tan. Okay, so look at this, QVOP7, QVOP8. Okay, QVOP is Quaternary Very Old Corallic. Okay, QVOP8A. See this long linear feature? That is a beach ridge. QVOP9. It isn't until you get all the way to the coast that your QOP6, Quaternary Old Corallic. So that's what it looks like on the geologic map. All right, so now we have this word corallic, which I didn't have a clue what it meant. So I looked it up in the AGI glossary. By the sea, but non-marine, especially pertaining to inner-tongue marine and continental deposits laid down on the landward side of a coast or in shallow water subject to marine invasion. Is that word salad? All right, so essentially what it means is coastal marsh, estuary, or beach. All right, so coastal marsh, I found no evidence of any sulfur cycle, and there's no little stringers of organic matter, so reject that. Estuary, that's where you get dark muds. We're talking about red sandstones, forget that. So that's why I decided we're talking about beach deposits. All right, so where do beach sediments come from? So most beach sediments are carried by the rivers to the ocean. So here's the rivers in San Diego. All right, so I went looking for the beaches. Okay, so here's San Luis Rey River with its beach coming into the ocean. And here's the San Dieguito River. The ocean's right just off here. And then look at the amount of magnetite that is in this story. All right, so I wanted to know the geology of the rocks. I wanted fabulous colored geology, and I needed fat rivers. And Laura Hampton did the GIS for us. All right, so these terraces that I'm talking about, they're all here in the Quaternary where it's yellow. Okay, and then forget the Pleistocene, forget the tertiary sedimentary rocks, forget the Cretaceous marine rocks. Now the Cretaceous pink, the batholith granitic rocks are that. And then the Peninsular Range gabbroic rocks, those are the red bodies. And then the Cretaceous Santiago Peak volcanics, that's the blue. And then also there's the Jurassic rocks. So where is the magnetite? The magnetite's in the andesite, gabbro, monzogranite, and tonalite. So there's the mineralogy of the rocks in the watershed, and the magnetite and the ilmenites in the andesite, gabbro, monzogranite, and tonalite. All right, so I went looking in the rivers to tell me about the magnetite. So San Luis, from north to south, San Luis Rey, San Diego, Sweetwater, Upper Tijuana, and Lower Tijuana. Okay, so this side is transmitted light, and this side is reflected light. Transmitted, reflected. Okay, so it's very interesting to see that the magnetite that's in the rivers already has oxidation products on it. So it could be being carried from the rocks in the upper watershed. All right, so how about the magnetite on the beaches? All right, so from north to south, San Onofre, Oceanside, Del Mar, Tourmaline, Ocean Beach, and Imperial Beach. All right, same thing, transmitted light, reflected light. So here you see on the beaches, there's lepidocrosite on Oceanside Beach. Tourmaline Beach is really interesting. There's goethite. Here you can see the magnetite underneath, goethite and lepidocrosite. And Ocean Beach, there's lepidocrosite, and Tijuana River, Imperial Beach, there's lepidocrosite. So there's oxidation products even in the beaches. All right, so what about other beach sediments in San Diego? So one of the things that's interesting about the beaches in San Diego, I'm not a beach person, so is that the Army Corps of Engineers comes and they dredge. And that mixes the magnetite and the quartz together. Sometimes the dredge materials from offshore, obviously here, this year, they were dredging onshore. Okay, this and troposphere. The other place where you get sediment that's coming onto the beaches is from the cliff debris flows. So here we have, this is Torrey Pines, here we have the Eocene and the Pleistocene are mixing in to become part of the modern beach. All right, so beach sedimentation. So it's really interesting if you travel, when Pat Abbott was teaching sedimentation, he had all the students out to Imperial Beach and they had to cut a trench all the way across the entire Imperial Beach so that they could see the sediment structures. And look at the amount of magnetite that's in there. Michelle gathered some magnetite for me. Look at this stuff, it's black, white, black, white. So I think it's winter beach, summer beach, winter beach, summer beach. Amount of magnetite in beaches here in San Diego County is crazy. The other kind of sedimentation we get are beach ridges. So there's Dahlia walking all the way down to the end to collect sediments for Jill's class. Sorry that my throat is deciding it wants to cough. Okay, beach ridges. So one of the things that was just totally brilliant that Gary Peterson did was that he recognized that there were these long linear sand bodies along the coast, and he realized that those were beach ridges. And then Kern and Rockwell drew this beautiful diagram to show that the Linda Vista Terrace, the Linda Vista Beach Ridge, the Tecolote Terrace, Tecolote Beach Ridge, Claremont Terrace, Claremont Beach Ridge. And then he took me on a drive. We drove on one of the roads that went along this way. You drive down the road and then I'll say go up, and you go down the road, up, up. So you can actually drive the beach ridges. And the most amazing beach ridge is Carmel Mountain. I'm sitting right here at the light and I'm taking a picture of Carmel Mountain, and that was crazy. That's like way too high. But then I realized, aha, there's where the terraces, where the houses are. If you walk the road along Carmel Mountain, it still looks like a beach ridge. All right, so modern beach ridges. So here's Silver Strand, and you can see that the cars, the SUVs, can't see over to the ocean. And I needed a sample from the top, so Dahlia climbed up to the top to get me that sample. And the most amazing beach ridge I ever saw in my life on the internet was Dorset, England. So look at this beach ridge. See this house? I think that they can look from the second story across it. You recognize Dorset, JR? That's where Mary Anning was from. All right, so now I want to tell you a little bit about my work in the field. All right, so I told you these crazy vocabulary words, Quaternary QVOP, Old Puralic, and Quaternary Old Puralic, QOP. This is the late Pleistocene, and the QVOPs go from 1 to 13, and the QOPs go from 1 to 7. All right, so now I want to show you the Pleistocene terrestrial terrace reddish brown sandstones. All right, so let's just look at this title for a second. Pleistocene. All right, so I already showed you that it probably has Pliocene in there. Where's my obnoxious yellow arrow? So it's probably Pleistocene. Okay, terrestrial terrace, I explained that. Reddish brown. Like normal humans look at this and say red beds, but if you look at the color chart drives it into reddish brown. All right, so these are one outcrop of each one of the terraces that I was able to access. So there's QOP, there's one. Hey, stupid thing. How do you get that thing off the top so I can show you that? Okay, so this is 7. Okay, 7. Is that right? Does it say 7? 6? 3. There's no 5, 4, 2, 4. It's called 2, 4, 1. All right, just look at these colors: 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 2, QBOP1, the very oldest one. So one of the questions that you can ask is it getting darker through time? Is there more oxidation? Certainly, if you look at QVOP1, it certainly is the darkest of all of them, but you can also see I'm all the way at the base, and that would be like alluviation all the way at the base. So I need to get another one. I have discovered an outcrop. It's behind a fence in front of a locked school. I'm in contact with the principal, and she says that the day that she can get back to the school, I can get back to the outcrop. But if you look at the colors, you really don't see a gradation. The only color changes that I really see are that the beach ridges are lighter than the beach. Beach ridge, lighter than the beach. That's the only one I've been able to really isolate. So I'm a retired person, so I do not have a lab anymore. So I thought I would share what my house lab looks like. So I wash out the clay and the silt, and I dry the samples. I save the clay, so there's a research project if somebody wants to do that. I sieve them. I pull out the magnetite by putting the magnet underneath a paper plate. I view with transmitted light. I view with reflected light. That's my husband's little flashlight. It has an LED on it. It's on a paper towel roll, and it works beautiful for reflected light. And then I photograph through the eyepiece with my iPhone. So this is my work under the microscope. Once upon a time, when I worked at the USGS, I had a $20,000 microscope and fabulous, expensive 650 and 1000X lenses. All right, now I have a $500 student microscope. I have 100 and 450X lenses. I have a stereoscope, gives me 10 and 30. And then to do my analysis, I sieve the samples to coarse sand, medium sand, fine sand, and I save the clay silt. So these are the minerals that I can identify underneath the microscope, and I'm just going to point out 4 of them: quartz, magnetite, ilmenite, and hematite. All right, so what makes red beds? So what makes red beds is pigmentation. So this says reflectance of magnetite and ilmenite, all right? So these are the pigments. Ferrihydrite, you see the magnetite right here? This ferrihydrite just is like real fluffy stuff on the magnetite. And then goethite is a yellow. You can see it around the magnetite. Lepidocrosite is metallic, almost reddish. And then ilmenite has this sort of white purple on it. I was calling it leucoxene, but I was just reading on Mindat, and they said leucoxene doesn't exist anymore, it's anatase. So I just changed that to anatase. All right, so these pigments are polymorphs of ferric oxyhydroxide. So here they are: lepidocrosite, goethite, acadamite, ferrihydrite, hematite, maghemite, and magnetite. Okay, so acadamite, those are really acid hot springs, so we don't have to think about that. And maghemite, I have no idea what maghemite is. It can bite me on the butt and I would miss it entirely. These ferric oxyhydroxides, you see hydroxide, 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 water, and then they fall off, and so then you have real mineralization here. This ferrihydrite is wrong color to me, and I finally realized that's the color of 6-line ferrihydrite. But I want to show you the ferrihydrite that bacteria precipitate first. This is the 6-line ferrihydrite. An X-ray machine, it's absolutely beautiful. But the ferrihydrite that bacteria are interacting with is called 2-line or 2-hump ferrihydrite. And this is its color. Here's groundwater, anoxic groundwater carrying iron 2+ coming on out into the creek, and the iron bacteria, oopsie daisy, are precipitating ferrihydrite. Put a microscope slide in, and the microscope slide is the color of the ferrihydrite. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to run you through all 20 of the terraces, and they're all going to be the same. So there's the outcrop, there's the terrace I'm talking about. These two are magnetite, these two are quartz. That's transmitted light, reflected light, transmitted light, reflected light. So this is QOP7, Bird Rock Terrace, lepidocrosite on the magnetite, and there's goethite on the quartz. Okay, next. Oh, why is it not taking me to the next? Okay, 6, Nestor, okay. There's an outcrop, there's where it is. We have goethite and ferrihydrite on the quartz. Okay, 5 must be on Pendleton. 4, can't find 4 anywhere. So this is 3, Guy Fleming, and there it is there. Lepidocrosite on the magnetite, ferrihydrite, and goethite on the quartz. This is the one that they call 2 to 4. I guess I can't figure out which one it is. So there's the outcrop, the terrace, lepidocrosite, goethite. Okay, 2, have no idea where 2 is. QOP1, golf course, there's the outcrop, there's where it is, lepidocrosite, goethite. Okay, now we start with the QVOPs, the older ones. There's the outcrop, terrace, ferrihydrite, ferrihydrite on the magnetite, ferrihydrite on the quartz. Okay, QVOP12. All right, outcrop, terrace, lepidocrosite, ferrihydrite on the magnetite. Now that bizarre color, this is goethite plus manganese oxide on the quartz. Okay, QVOP11, Claremont, ferrihydrite, lepidocrosite, that goethite plus manganese oxide. What outcrop? You know that outcrop? You know what that is? That's a Red Butte at Torrey Pines. Okay, 10A, Beech Ridge. There it is. Ferrihydrite, ferrihydrite. 10, Tecolote Terrace. Ferrihydrite, goethite. 9A, Beech Ridge. Okay, the lepidocrosite on the magnetite. Hematite. In hematite, finally, this is the first time I'm finding any, and this is detrital hematite, and there's that funny color, that goethite plus manganese oxide. Okay, the Linda Vista, this is the type section of the Linda Vista. Lepidocrosite, hematite, there's crystalline hematite on the quartz, and goethite on the quartz. All right, 8A, Beech Ridge. So there's the Beech Ridge. There's the ferrihydrite on the magnetite, goethite, and there's hematite on the goethite. Okay, 8, Tierra Santa, outcrop. Ferrihydrite on the magnetite, goethite plus manganese oxide on the quartz. Okay, Mira Mesa, there's the outcrop. Ferrihydrite on the magnetite, crystalline hematite on the quartz, and goethite on the quartz. 6, Black Mountain, lepidocrosite on the magnetite, goethite plus manganese oxide on the quartz. Okay, 5, Rifle Range, lepidocrosite on the magnetite, detrital hematite on transmitted light, and goethite on the quartz. Okay, 4, aqueduct. There's the outcrop, ferrihydrite, detrital hematite, and goethite on the quartz. 3, Aliso Canyon, lepidocrosite, hematite, detrital, goethite plus manganese oxide on the quartz. 2, Flores Hills, ferrihydrite on the magnetite, goethite plus manganese oxide on the quartz. And finally, the very oldest of the oldest, the Eagle, lepidocrosite on the magnetite and goethite on the quartz. Okay, so I thought it was pretty cool that I discovered that there was all this magnetite in the beach sediments, and then I was reading Miller and Folk, 1955. Occurrence of detrital magnetite and ilmenite in red sediments, new approaches to significance of red beds. Study shows that all red beds contain detrital magnetite or ilmenite. The formation of red beds depends primarily on the presence of an igneous or metamorphic source which supplies them and is only indirectly dependent on climate or environment of deposition. So our terrace red beds are absolutely perfect red beds. All right, so what are the consequences of having so much magnetite? Okay, so is the magnetite acidity wiping out the beach shells? So, you know, beaches have shells, right? Here's Jasmine. She's out collecting. She was collecting, went down the stairs to collect the beach for me, and she brought back some shells. This is where Shell Beach is, La Jolla Cove. Dahlia went out to collect her samples for Jill, and she came back with her shell collection. And this was my shell collection at Torrey Pines Beach. And then look at the amount of magnetite that's already mixed in with the shell, all right? The only place where any shells have ever been discovered in this Pleistocene stuff was George Kennedy's work along Santo Road. The system along Santo Road sits on the Friars Formation, which is calcareous. All right, so let's go look at this about how we generate this acid I think the acid wiping out the shells. The oxidation of magnetite in water produces hydrogen ions. So magnetite plus water, ferric mineral, hydrogen ions, acid. I think the acidity is taking out the shells, and that the Friars Formation in the subsurface right underneath the red sediment is preserving those shells. All right, so how are the pigments formed? So this is also known as microbial precipitation of pigments on magnetite and quartz. This will be iron and manganese oxide biofilms, and the biofilms form on minerals, rocks, beer bottles, microscope slides, cement, whatever. All right, so when you're talking about bacteria, you always ask, where's the food? And bacteria food is electrons. So where are the electrons? So if you put magnetite in water, magnetite plus water, ferric minerals, it gives off electrons. So that means that magnetite is fabulous food for bacteria. All right, so let me show you. This is a magnetite unit cell. So the Fe2+, which the iron bacteria are going to oxidize, are at the corners. And then the rest of the iron, the black dots, the corners are the green dots, right? The Fe2+. The black dots are the Fe3+. So the Fe2+ is for the oxidizers, and the Fe3+ is good for the reducers. So I'd like to show you some magnetite experiments with bacteria. This is Brown et al. So he took a granite slab that has magnetite, he sterilized everything, and then he injected biofilm-forming bacteria. So in 3 days, he had bacteria that colonized the magnetite. In 6 days, the bacteria had coated themselves with the biofilm, and you can barely see them underneath it. And 2 months later, there were holes in the magnetite. The bacteria were doing that. Here was another bacteria experiment that Anicia Henna ran. And what she found was at pH 5, the bacteria were attaching themselves to the magnetite with pili, little attachment structures. And there they had already produced fluffy ferrihydrite. All right, so her experiment is sort of called Life in the Acid Zone. And that is, let's go back to the oxidation of magnetite produces hydrogen ions for the bacteria, right? Okay, electrons for the bacteria and hydrogen ions to make acid. So she did pH 2, 3, and 5. At pH 2, she took clean magnetite, put the acid bacteria in there, and they kept driving the pH back up to 5, and she had to keep pouring acid back in to keep it acid. Funny experiment, but I want to show you the pH 5. pH 5 is where she shows the bacteria making their little pili, and it's pH 5 underneath the bacteria, pH 2 underneath the bacteria, and pH 5 on the outside. There was another really interesting diagram in that paper, and that is she was showing that this was she was working in Spain, group, which is the iron silicate, and found the bacteria were precipitating ferrihydrite, and then the ferrihydrite would dehydrate to goethite, and there's the trace fossil bacteria in there, and then was predicting that after millions of years, this ferrihydrite goethite would dehydrate to hematite. And the other part of the experiment, the thought process was you start off with magnetite, bacteria create maghemite, and then after millions of years, it goes to hematite. And the thing that really threw me about this was that I was reading Shukrif et al. 1973, and they explained that heat and salinity will drive the water off of the ferrihydrite and make hematite in the lab. So it's not always millions of years. All right, so these pigments are formed by chembiotic processes. And chembiotic was a word that was invented by Craig Savella at NRCS. We were working in acid mine drainage in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Bob Hedden and I were having these field wars. He's yelling that all of this mess is chemical, and I'm yelling that all of this mess is biological. And Craig finally jumped in the middle of us and said, it's both. It's biology and chemistry. It's chembiotic. And I thought, wow, that's such a cool word, chembiotic. So the abiotic, the chemical part of the story, is lepidocrosite and hematite. And the biological part of the story is ferrihydrite and manganese oxide. And then the postbiotic story is goethite. Right, so I want to show you the abiotic films, okay? Lepidocrosite looks very metallic on magnetite, and crystalline hematite is very metallic too. So those are, by the time they formed that, that's abiotic. The biofilms on quartz are not crystalline. Those are biotic. Okay, so I want to show you biofilms, okay? So the biofilms are really cool. So the bacteria attached to whatever, the beer bottle or the microscope slide, or the magnetite, the bacteria attach, and then they form a monolayer, and then they form a microcolony, and if everything's still fine, then they'll form a big biofilm, and you can't see them through the biofilm anymore. So these are biofilms. This is where I put the microscope slide where manganese was precipitating, and the microscope slide where ferrihydrite was precipitating, and those are biofilms. So I want to go off on a second onto the manganese cycle, because I showed that we do have manganese in this story. So there's manganese oxide on fracture surfaces. Now underneath the microscope, here you have manganese oxide on goethite, and here you have manganese oxide on quartz. So where's the manganese coming from? Check this out. This is Kimbrough's work, right? Check this out. Monzo granite, gabbro, tonalite, and andesite. Manganese and iron travel together and they precipitate together. So they're coming from the same rocks. So the oxidized manganese is this brown or black color. This is the San Diego River, and you can see that the cobbles are coated with manganese oxide. You crack open a cobble and you can see it's not manganese all the way through. Put a microscope slide in the water, pull it out, look underneath the microscope, and you can see all these holdfasts of this bacterium. So here's the bacterium that's attaching, it attaches itself. It attaches, it makes a holdfast, it makes a filament, it makes a sheath, and then it oxidizes its holdfast, and then it falls away, and then you just see all this manganese oxide on the holdfast. Okay, so the iron bacteria also do the same thing. They're oxidizing iron or manganese, and the iron bacteria are precipitating iron oxide on these holdfasts. So here is a place where groundwater is discharging. There's the ferrihydrite. There's where the bacteria are. You put the microscope slide in, leave it there for a couple months, and you can see the holdfast, the same bacterium. So it's oxidizing the holdfast. Here's the other iron bacteria that is part of the story, I think. This is the other one that oxidizes iron or manganese, and it makes capsules. So these are called siderocapsa, and you can see they're really small. This is 5 microns, but also they're heterotroph. They need organic matter. So here they are growing on a poop. This is a zooplankton fecal pellet. Okay, so these are the bacteria that are involved in the biofilms making the red beds, okay? We got Discophora-like holdfasts. We got Siderocapsa-like capsules. There's the little Siderocapsa that live inside that kind. We have rods, short, medium, and long, called bacilli. We have cocci, those are the round things. And we have coccobacilli, so that is halfway in between. All right, so now I'm going to run all 20 again, okay? So this is QOP7, the very youngest one, Discophora, holdfast, capsules, short rods. There's a wood cell, so there in the very youngest one, there is actually some organic matter in this story. Remember, I'm using a student microscope, not a research grade microscope, so looking at the bacteria is not all that wonderful, okay? QOP6, okay? Holdfast, coccobacilli, capsules. See there, these guys have colonized the mica, not the quartz, and capsules. QOP3, holdfast, short rods. QOP24, capsules. These guys are colonizing plagioclase, and then short rods. QOP1, the oldest of the young ones, capsules, medium and long rods. Okay, so now the youngest of the very old. Okay, capsules, medium rods, cocci. 12, holdfasts, capsules, short and medium rods. 11, holdfasts, capsules, medium rods. Quaternary very old Peralic 10, capsules, holdfast, short rods. QOP9, capsules, holdfast, cocci, short rods. QVOP8, capsules, holdfast, cocci. QVOP7, that's Linda Vista, right? Capsules, coccobacilli, and short rods. Okay, QVOP6, all right? Coccobacilli, these guys are colonizing mica, not quartz. Capsules on quartz, holdfast, coccobacilli. QVOP5, capsules, holdfast, and then capsules. These guys have colonized detrital hematite. Okay, QVOP4, cocci, capsules, short rods, medium rods, and capsules. Okay, QVOP3, holdfasts, capsules. 2, holdfast, cocci, and capsules. And finally, the oldest of the oldest, short rods, capsules, Here, the cocci are colonizing zircon and capsules. Okay, so I putting it all together, sort of this is my first try of a putting it all together slide, okay? I got rainwater and groundwater. I got oxygenated groundwater, groundwater carries iron 3+. I have deoxygenated groundwater, it carries iron 2+. So the aerobic bacteria live there and the anaerobic bacteria live there. And then they come to the unit cell of magnetite, and the anaerobes, they reduce the iron 3+ to 2+. And here we have abiotic lepidocrocite growing between the little 3+, and there we have some goethite. And then there we have an aerobic bacteria that is oxidizing the iron 2+ to 3+. And so downstream from there is a quartz grain. And here you have the quartz is coated with ferrihydrite. And the ferrihydrite is because the aerobic bacteria are taking the 2+ and they're oxidizing it to 3+. So here's a real actual quartz grain with 3+ on it. All right, now I'm going to shift the subject entirely and over to concretions. And it's really interesting, but soil scientists call them soil concretions, and geologists call them iron manganese nodules, and kids call them rollers. My favorite kid is Joe Coronis. He took me on a field trip to Miramar landfill, and here you can see the concretions. It's really scary to walk on those things. And also it's obvious that this is a lag deposit, and it represents how many missing feet a section. That's a good research project for somebody. So these are Pleistocene iron manganese concretions in place. Oopsie daisy, did I show you the manganese? I meant to show you this. This is one of them, iron, manganese, iron concretion. Okay, so these are hillside cross sections where the concretions are in place. This is Carmel Mountain. This is Torrey Pines Extension. This is Miramar Landfill. This is Crest Canyon. And even Red Butte at Torrey Pines has a zone with concretions in it. Okay, so the concretions. So you can see that they're really abundant from 8A all the way down to the youngest. But wait, the reason I even have any concretions at all is my girlfriend, Kathy Dickey, who's crazy about concretions and crazy about magnetite. She's a docent at Torrey Pines, and she even made a magnetite hands-on exhibit for kids who visit the visitor center. I collect the sandstone, and she collects the concretions. She hands them to me. I bag them, I label them, and I store them. And then I wanted to know, okay, well, do all these terraces have concretions? And it turned out that these do, but I think that Kathy was never in the field with me. This is all Scripps Ranch area. And so I think maybe if I could take Kathy to Scripps Ranch, we probably would find that there's concretions in all of them. So one of the things I noticed is that she high grades them. She's always picking them up with the magnetite wand. And so I went somewhere by myself and I swept a whole bunch together, and then I tested them. And I found that magnetite, partially magnetic, and then non-magnetic. So it's it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Okay, so then I took 2 of each, I cracked them open to find out if they were nodules or concretions layered, and then I tested them. So these are the magnetic ones. There you can see the magnetite. You can see by magnet underneath the 3" by 3" magnet underneath the paper plate. The partially magnetic ones had a whole lot of magnetite. I think they're larger than even the magnetic ones, so maybe that's why. And the non-magnetic ones even had magnetite. So that one had, this one had more than that one. That one only had a little. So I think maybe the magnetite was more in the center. So when you test it all the way around the edge to see if it picks it up with the magnetite, with the magnet, so maybe it doesn't. Hold on just 1 second. sorry. Okay, so how do concretions form in the soil? So I was working in a wetland in Virginia, and I was finding I was working on iron bacteria in the soil and in the streams, and I found these iron manganese nodules in the stream. So I told the soil scientist that, and he came out with a bunch of his students, and they dug a ditch. He found clay in the subsurface, so that's where the aquitard was. He found that the nodules were in that part there, so the soil nodules look just like the stream nodules. And so then we were trying to figure out, well, what's going on here? So we sort of realized that in the summer you had trees with leaves, and in the winter they didn't have any at all. So it looks like the trees were in charge of the water table. So we realized we were dealing with a shifting water table, shifting redox boundary. And then I was reading Mitsuchi 1976, and he said dry-wet cycles in his section in Japan. So that's sort of the same thing, shifting redox boundary, shifting water table, and wet and dry cycles. So what's happening, the trees were leaves in the summer, and they were in charge of the water. And then when they dropped their leaves, the water table jumped right back up to the surface. Well, is that a model for us in San Diego? Do we have deciduous trees? All right, so what grows on the red beds today, right? We got Torrey pines. They're growing on rocks so that they throw their roots out at the surface. So this is at the visitor center. This is granddaddy Torrey pines. Robin helped me find this. That's what a healthy old Torrey pine looks like. It's from Carpinteria. Here's a Torrey pine that they cut down at Crest Canyon, and there's its root systems at the surface. And I noticed also that Toyon is also throwing its roots out at the surface. Okay, so what trees were growing here during the Pleistocene? So fossil tree roots in terrace red beds. So Crest Canyon is this absolutely gorgeous. Obviously, the trunk was there, and there's the root system. Here at Torrey Pines on the path to Razor Point, there's fossil roots in there. Okay, and then the most amazing place on Earth is Via Cantabria in Encinitas, QVOP 10 to 11. See these beautiful sedimentary structures? The only thing that I found in the literature that looks like that are grasses. There are grasses that can put their massive root systems down 20, 25 feet to go find the water table. But also there's this sedimentary structure. That one looks like a shrub. And then this one, didn't that look like a buttressed tree? And then I think I found a fossil palm. So last slide, right? What I know and what I don't know. So what I know, there's magnetite in everything. The red sandstone is pigmented from the oxidation of magnetite. The pigments coat the magnetite and the quartz. They're dominated by goethite. I didn't actually show you that. If I just showed you 20 pictures of goethite, you wouldn't have loved it. The abiotic ones are lepidocrosite and hematite, and the biotic ones are ferrihydrite, goethite, and manganese oxide. All right, so what I don't know, the timing of the weathering, Pleistocene and Holocene, and then how does the iron really transfer from the magnetite to the quartz? I mean, I need reduction and then oxidation, so when and how? And then how does hematite form? Do I need salinity and burial heat? And is there a color gradation from the youngest to the oldest sandstones? And does every terrace sequence have soil concretions? And what grew on the terraces? And do I actually have to pay attention to maghemite? So now my thank you slides, right? Thank you to my field partners, the students that have knees, and then my colleagues who took me to their field site or gave me references or taught me something. And then thank you to my field buddies who will go out in the field with me whenever I don't want to go all by myself. And thank you to my sister who gave me a stereoscopic microscope. There's Bernie. thank you to National Park Service and California State Parks for collecting permits. And there's my email if you want to ask me a question or pick on me or teach me something. Thank you.
Thank you, Nori. That was great. Oh, I don't have any video. I know I clicked it. There we are. That's fantastic. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat now.
Laura, what made me think of using, what did it say? What made me think of using reflected light? Oh, that came from Phil Besky at the survey. He, in the mineral lab, he had this beautiful setup of a research microscope that had both reflected and transmitted light, and you could work it with your feet. So you could sit all day in front of the microscope and just go back and forth between transmitted and reflected, transmitted and reflected. And I was working on pyrite, so black mineral. So I thought, I'm working on another black mineral. Let's see what happens under reflected light. And then all of a sudden, there's all those amazing pigments. That's my question.
Yeah, just great.
Those has a question.
Lori?
You want to just ask, Monte? You want to just ask?
What?
Oh, okay, Wes. Is there a source
No.
of oxygen other than the atmosphere via rivers? Is there a source of oxygen? Wes, I don't understand the question. Groundwater has about oxygenated groundwater will have like 8 milligrams per liter oxygen in it. And sometimes it'll be really deep where there's not enough organic matter, so the bacteria aren't reducing the water, aren't reducing the amount of oxygen in the water. So you can have really deep oxygenated water or really shallow oxygenated water. Is that what you were asking? Can you just ask the question rather than?
I don't know what the format is. My question is, can these form at depth in an aquifer because oxygen gets burnt up fairly close to the land surface? So the person said it's all about magnetite, which is true. You got to have the source material. But I think from what you've said, you have to have oxygen or you don't get all this forming.
Well, a lot of these, a lot of the bacteria are, they're, what's the word that they use? I forget it right now. They don't need all that much oxygen.
Oh, anaerobic?
Huh? No, so there's a microaerophilic. The microaerophils, like the iron, some of the iron bacteria are microaerophils, so that they need like 4 milligrams per liter oxygen, and they can change things to ferrihydrite. Some of them are fully aerobic, they need like 8. And so that's what happens. That you can have this whole variety of amount of oxygen, and the bacteria will just sort of like design the system for themselves so that they're getting the electrons they need. And if there's carbon dioxide that they need or organic matter that they need, they'll find it. But how deep? Okay, how deep?
So Nori,
well,
my question was, if I see a red bed, I assume it was near land surface.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah, Laurie?
Yeah.
I've had a lot of experience with titanomagmamites, that the magnetite and pillow basalts on the seafloor has titanium in it, so it's a titanomagnetite. But when it weathers or oxidizes on the seafloor, it turns into titanomagmamite. And so magmamite is just a cation deficient spinel. It has the formula Fe2O3, but it has the structure, the cubic structure of magnetite. And so that would be a big source for your iron, is pulling the iron out of the magnetite and turning it into magmamite.
And also that the pillow basalt, what's that guy's name? Dave Emerson worked on the iron bacteria on the pillow basalts in Hawaii. There's your story. So there was your iron 2+ for the iron bacteria to oxygenate it.
Yeah.
What did you say, Roy? What were you trying to teach me?
Teach you nothing, you know it all. But I just made an observation, relates mainly to the geomorphology. You had a photograph of the Tecolote terrace, I think. And I was just looking at the soils, that is the weathering profiles. And of course, there was a relative terms, but a strongly developed relic paleosol on the surface, but there was also a very nicely developed buried paleosol. Now that's sort of intriguing because the paleosol implies the buried soil, the argillic horizon, implies a long period of weathering, and we can argue about the climate that it formed under paleo environment. Then it's covered by, I'm guessing here from the scale, maybe a foot or 2 feet, a meter or so, of overlying sediments, and then that weathered, and there's now the surface soil, which has gone through multiple, given its elevation, has gone through multiple epochs of weathering, presumably related to Pleistocene climatic change. But what's also intriguing, and I'm digressing, making these statements here, when sea level is lower, the shelf is lowered, or the shelf is exposed rather, and so the relatively coarse grained sediments blow up and form the so-called beach ridges, but mainly sands of one grain size or another. But the silts, the finer grain, goes farther inland, and that stuff gets deposited on the higher terraces and eventually is incorporated into the soil and bioturbation with whatever the vegetation is at the particular time. So ironically, and I don't know, maybe somebody in San Diego has written it all up, when sea level is lower, glaciostatic lowering, the beach ridges are forming, they're getting higher, they're increasing. So the relative relief is greatest during a low stand. You get accretion on land, and yet you have the main streams are deeply incised into the now eustatically lowered, glaciostatically lowered sea level. So there's a real geomorphic history there. And as you probably know, well, you know better than the rest of us perhaps, but the soil scientists have been involved in this weathering process for eons, and it's not linear. Apparently it goes on. It's dependent on whatever the climate and the vegetation is at the time. So, and the uplift rates, and you were very astute in pointing out the offshore sources of sort of the uplift as well as regional tectonics, because those terraces are just found, as you know, all the way up along the California coast and into Oregon and Washington, the marine terraces, the uplifted ones. So anyway, I didn't mean to go into lecture 47-3, but thank you for showing those wonderful photographs. They just raise a lot of questions. That's all. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Roy.
I really appreciate, Roy. You know, you were asking me about silt, and I just, I take the silt and the clay and I bag it. But I started to look at some of the silt, and it was interesting that what I was finding in the silt-sized particles were broken up mica. So
yeah,
that's the only thing I have to tell you about silt so far.
Now I'm thinking of the grain size, not so much what the mineralogy is, but thank you.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, Lori?
Yeah.
Yeah, in your reflected light, did you ever use polished sections, or were they just loose grains that you bounce light off of?
Just loose grains. I just take the sand and I just sieve it, pull out the different sizes of the quartz. I do not have instruments at home.
Yeah, that would be really nice if you still had access to survey instruments.
Oh no, then you'd have to do everything indoors.
No kidding.
Monty, I offered that, but it's a super clean room. We don't allow humans in them, so the microscope will sit unencumbered, almost. So I did have a question I sent via chat. So Monty has his rhombocosm, and Tom has his uplifted terraces, but I assume those terraces were down dropped into Monty's rhombocosm as well, or parts of them. And would they be archived as red beds?
Well, the other half of the sentence that Miller and Folk said was The reason most sediments are not red beds is because they move into the zone of reduction, and so the iron is reduced. So if they stay out of the zone of reduction, then they will be red beds. If they get moved into a place like an estuary that has a high organic matter, then they'll be reduced and they'll no longer look like red beds to you.
Will they be texturally different because of the formation of the red bed?
Well, we were asking that question in the Triassic, and what we found was there was a series of sandstones that were in the zone of reduction that was next to the zone of oxidation. And I don't remember the quartz grains being any different, whether they were in the zone of oxidation or zone of reduction. But it's a interesting question. We could actually run the experiment.
So not to beat the same dead horse, but the issue for me always is what constrains vertical groundwater movement. And it's not easy to find this confining clay layer that doesn't exist. But those red beds would do a hell of a good job if they can create the vernal pools. They can certainly create a perched groundwater system that we've found in different of our holes that we've drilled. Or in the subsurface, my thought is maybe they get into the reducing area, but they still have some chemical characteristic because they've broken down the minerals into smaller minerals. You've taken a feldspar, it's now a clay, some weathering process that you've identified that ends up with a red bed, but it also ends up with a different physical feature, less permeable. So,
well, I'm sort of, I'm just thinking bacteria, okay? So I'm trying to figure out what my bacteria are doing to your sediments. So things like
tell them to stop.
Lepidocrosite and hematite, like maybe that stuff, maybe it still hangs around. And if you looked at what you were talking about, looked at sediments with reflected light, maybe you'd still see some of the oxidation products on the magnetite. That's my best, Wes.
Okay, so for your next life or your continuing life, I mean, I have no idea what decade you are actually in now. It's as Luke said, it's pretty impressive.
Vaccine. I got my first vaccine.
You should have been the top of the list, I think. I always call you a pixie, but I think a sprite. In Shakespeare, I think of you as the person with abundant energy and always in play. So anyhow,
I'm your role model, kiddo.
Good energy.
Exactly. So when you want to,
energy.
there are a bunch in the once great Menlo Park USGS world. There are cores from all my wells that you can go find your bacteria in if you so choose.
And also, what about all the sediments that the first 8 wells of yours that I looked at and I bagged and they're sitting in the warehouse?
No, they're sitting in my storage container because I don't trust the government. Not throw them out.
Okay, well, pick some samples. You pick me a sample and let me take a look at it. Pick me a sample that fits what you're really the most curious about and hand it to me and I'll put it through my process. I need 20 grams.
Yes, separate.
Nori and Wes and Roy, I've got something to add into this that might be interesting to everyone. And that's, I'm working on a section in Australia where we see repeated soil sequences that are heavily stained various different colors. In fact, it's called Rainbow Beach because of the various oranges and reds that are present in this section. And we have dates that go back past 1.1 million. And these are all dune sands that are originally about 98% pure quartz. They're ultra mature. They've been transported about 1,100 kilometers from central New South Wales in the coastal system and then blown up onto the landscape during times of slightly lower sea level to create these massive dune sequences. And
I've been there, remember? I went to that place where you're talking about.
Rainbow Beach.
Island, right?
Say it again.
That's Strat Island, right?
North Stradbroke Island is one of them. Fraser Island is the other. They're the two world's largest sand islands. And the presence of these iron stained layers that we have, first of all, the B horizon of these giant podsols are capable of creating a cemented layer that will create an aquitard or an aquiclude. And we have perched lakes all over the islands that are in these sand dunes that are solely on these B horizons. The repeated BC layers that we see are really kind of akin to some of the really short-term things that you're seeing in some of your beach ridge deposits. And the interesting thing is that we don't have a volcanic or an igneous or even a metamorphic source rock. We have nothing but quartz, and we're getting these iron stained horizons that are just absolutely brilliant in their colors.
Well, your iron 2+ has to be coming from somewhere, so that the iron bacteria are changing it to iron 3+. So where's your iron coming from? Is it ocean iron? Is it, you know, remember the wetlands? If you drive down to the ocean at what was it called?
North Stradbroke.
Stradbroke, if you drive down the road to go to the ocean and you pass the wetland over on the north side that has the cattails growing in it, that would be a source of reduction because that's high organic matter.
Yes, but those aren't always present. Those are very ephemeral in the record that we have. And these horizons that we have core transects and ground penetrating radar transects that show that these B horizons are pervasive for well over the entire 20-kilometer width of the island, regardless of the topography of the island, and they occur at the same exact depth, showing a soil formation process. And the quartz, the sand grains that we have, there isn't a large, we're talking less than 2% of things other than quartz that are able to create these massive iron stained horizons. So I think there's a possibility that we have some other things that may be going on, that you don't need a really iron rich rock or magnetite deposits to be able to form some of these types of deposits.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So those are places where groundwater is moving, like that wetland I was showing you in Virginia. The groundwater was coming from far away, and it was moving down through the environment, and then it was moving into the quartz sand, and then it's sort of that bacteria, as long as there's oxygen, right? Oxygen and 2+, and then back to what Wes was saying, how much oxygen is oxygen, right? Oxygen but plus iron 2+, the iron bacteria will change it to iron 3+. So if you want to give me some of those sand grains, I'll show you where the iron bacteria are on your iron stained sand grains. Take you some photographs.
I'll grab you some sand as soon as I'm able to go back to Australia.
Yeah, I didn't grab any sand, so I don't have a sample from there.
So my idea would be do a mass spec and figure out what continent the windblown deposit came from.
Came from Africa. That's right. It could, you know what? It's not really funny because remember we're talking about not the red tide, but the red grains that are coming from Africa and feeding the ocean and going to Canada or something like that, the red sand. So you could be talking about iron source from someplace that you're not even dreaming about. Anybody else got a question? Roy, you raising your hand?
Yeah, I did, and a comment, and probably out of context, for which I apologize in advance. But what you're describing and some of the comments that have come up are really indicating the influence of aeolian processes as well. There's dust floating around all over the place. It may be somewhat periodic or episodic in the sense it depends on the source area, whether it's low stand, relative high stand, and so on. But there's always been variable fluxes of aeolian sediments that end up on these higher terraces at many times, the geomorphic surfaces. They're ultimately, as been pointed out here in the discussion, incorporated into the weathering process. They're fine enough in grain size, they end up forming these B horizons or these argillic horizons, these clay rich. That in turn perches water. And so there's plenty of perched water around. And the relative soil profile development, once it reaches that point where general gravitational water is plugged, it's a plugged horizon, and then the clays simply grow upward. That is, the argillic horizon gets thicker and thicker. And if you have, I guess the Australian example, if there's adequate rainfall around, you end up with permanent lakes that may expand and contract. In the Mediterranean climate, you'll end up at a micro scale with the so-called vernal pools. And in addition to the clay pan is, and somebody made a comment here too, yeah, there's always the iron silica pan, the durapan, the siltcrete. It may or may not be there, but it's just enough to impede the drainage. So this goes back in the whole discussion of Mima mounds, vernal pools, origins and arguments therefrom. There's no end of it. But the bottom line is that the aeolian processes are also working. They're much more subtle compared to the riverine or the fluvial, or even the marine deposits blowing sand up, but the silt is going somewhere. It's generally going east. Now, one last example, and it's been worked on forever in Southern California, and look at all the calcium carbonate that's blowing offshore during the Santa Ana winds. As we get this dust all over the place, and I guess the classic example is even San Clemente Island. And all the roots that are preserved there, again, mainly calcium carbonate. So we have lots of example of dust blowing things around both ways, onshore and offshore as well. So that's another, there's 121 geomorphic dissertations to be done right here locally.
And it's all force at a distance.
Of course. Thank you.
One other comment, I just want to include it. It's more for the Northwest, but you could relate it to the Southwest too, as paleosols. And in the Northwest here, we have paleosols within the basalts. And the classic is the Vantage Horizon in the Columbia River basalts. So it's in the Miocene horizons, and it goes from Idaho all the way into the Western Oregon, but it's also in Mexico too, and down all the way down in Rosarita Beach down to Ensenada. There's paleosols in the Miocene in there. So those are just hiatus, just soil horizons that have developed.
Sorry, yeah. But you put your finger on two different types of paleosols. One is the buried paleosol that you described forming on the basalts,
right?
Time of weathering and then eventually covered by the next flow. And then there's the relict paleosol. That's the one that's been at the surface for thousands and thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps. And so it's a relic. It's a relic of some time in the past. And here I am drawing my finger here for the curve, for the exponential curve, but it sort of levels off the rate of development. But there's always, in addition, a flux of silt or fine grained sediments that blow into that. That gets incorporated. You don't see it. It's bioturbated. It's in there, and you end up with these so-called abnormally thick horizons, usually the B horizon, though. There's just multiple, the argillic horizons. There's multiple of those. So it's a paleosol. It's never been buried. But the ones you describe, and they're, by the way, everywhere in the world, you get a road cut, you get a deep cut, you high probability there's a buried paleosol in there. And just the fact that you recognize that buried paleosol, much less the relic paleosol, tells you that there's a whole history that thing has been exposed to weathering for whatever the time and under a paleoclimate, and then the whole thing got buried again. Something changed, something happened. But you're absolutely right. They're all over. It's impossible not to find them.
Is every paleosol red?
No. They come in every color and shade you want. That's why I have a one-cell color book. It's only this sort of the end member when they really get weather. Depends on the climate, the paleoclimate, the modern climate, modern vegetation. They can get reduced. There's redox all over the place.
Yeah.
Or just maybe remnants of the red, the oxidation left. The vegetation with redox may be changing it. No, they're not always red, no.
Right.
Calcic soils.
You're talking about dust and stuff. What about cosmic dust that settles everywhere?
I'll believe anything.
Well,
Hi, Bill.
I'm Monty. Well, you're talking about dust blowing from Africa, and I'm thinking, well, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of the ocean bottom is layered with cosmic dust from wherever, and it could.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's one of the sources of iron.
Why not?
Je ne sais pas moi. I don't know.
And iron bacteria.
Well,
Hey,
anyway.
well, this was great, you guys. Are there any more questions for Nori?
I think my encouragement, Nori is great at sifting and sanding and doing all that sort of stuff, and made the story for San Diego paleontology possible because of that work. But Nori, I was looking to see, and I couldn't quite figure with all of your slides, the theme when it changes. Like you say, Tom had a nice linear graph that was unbelievable. And so I go, that's a little too straight.
Right.
But you're always the same critters among 15 terraces seem implausible also.
Well,
And if you could-
they blow with the sand, they blow with the wind. And so if there's a source of iron 2 plus, the iron bacteria will be there.
Well, I'm just thinking that there probably is something that would allow you to say something interesting about the differences when you snap it to the time of deposition. Something about the climate, something about the prevailing winds, something else. Otherwise, we're left with they're all identical. That seems strange to me.
Yeah, they are. I'm sure if somebody were sitting to do if someone would do the genomics, well, see, the bacteria are dead, all right? So those are the fossils of them. So, and they're not fossils like shells, you know, you have rods, you have cocci, round guys, and you've got coccobacilli, and that's what you got for bacteria. So that's why they don't really have very many. The bacteria have been given taxonomic names, but as soon as you do the genomics, you find out that you can't possibly tell. But the thing about the iron bacteria is that, you know, I have them in the Precambrian at 3.8 billion years ago from Iceland. So they certainly are stable on this earth, and they've been stable on this earth for a very long time. They don't.
You know,
Yeah. Okay,
great talk. Appreciate everything you've done, and I learned a lot.
Yeah, thanks,
I love
Nori.
you too.
As
I
always,
think for me, it's dinner
nuns.
time.
Nori, do you know about the microorganisms in the gunflint up in Canada, since you mentioned Iceland?
Yeah, I've worked on the gunflint, but there's fossils that you can actually identify. The algal fossils you can actually identify, but the same thing with the iron bacteria with holdfasts and capsules and rods. That's sort of what you can do bacterially even at that 2.2 billion years. What were you thinking of, Carol? Have you looked at the gunflint?
Not personally. I happen to have some samples of gunflint that I know have microorganisms in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the gunflint's pretty old. And so I just was curious if you knew anything about what might be those microorganisms.
Yeah.
I'm afraid you have to remember that I'm a geochemist.
Okay. I love geochemists.
but I sort of bypassed a whole lot of biology with my chemistry and physics minor. And so I'm always catching up with the critters. And but it just so happens I am aware that the gunflint does have these very, very old microorganisms.
Anybody else?
Go on.
Stories.
Well, it was a wonderful talk, Nori. As always, every day with you is a school day. Very much appreciated. I learned something new all the time. It's a fantastic thing about you. So thank you, everybody, for showing up. We'll have the newsletter out in the coming weeks. Next month, we have our own Barry Keller talking. I know he was in the chat not too long ago. Oh yeah, there he is. He's still there. So that'll be fantastic. Everybody, please come back, show up for Barry. Show the man some love. Until then, thank you guys, as always.
Yeah.
Adios.
Thanks.
Nauma.
Thanks, Nori.
Lots of love.